Hi, and welcome to our last unit, the Writing in the Humanities unit. Like our other units, I just want to go over some information to kind of orient you to the way we think and approach writing and research and creating in the humanities and help prepare you for how to approach your last unit. So the humanities follows and covers a wide range of disciplines, anything from linguistics to literature, art, religion, philosophy, music, theater, all of that falls under this because if it deals with human experience or the human creation, it's considered a part of the humanities. Now, just like in our last unit, there are going to be some that kind of waver between being humanities or social sciences, sometimes even humanities and natural sciences, but in general, if it's a field and the focus of your study is human creation and human experience and interpreting that in some way or creating something in that way, then we're going to label as humanities. This can be a really fun realm because it does give us flexibility because anything can be any type of text. It can be a written text, a visual text, an audio text, anything like that. But it also makes it frustrating because it is so nebulous, which is great because as humans we experience things so differently. But it's also frustrating because if you're used to more of a black and white kind of thinking, not having as much wiggle room, sometimes it can be a little difficult. But the great thing about humanities is you can participate in it even if you feel like you're not a creative person because you just add to the conversation by responding to the actual text. So whether it's a response to a piece of art, a piece of music, a short story, a poem, a study of linguistics, so like how language is developing and changing, any of those types of things, your personal religion or philosophy, you're adding to that conversation and becoming a part of the humanities. So in this unit, we are going to have a little bit more of a literary focus to help prepare you for your third English class if you're in a program of study that requires you to take a literature course. W.W. Norton is a very popular anthology and textbook company related to English, and so I'm using one of their definitions to talk about like what a literary analysis is in the humanities, and so they define it as an essay that examines literary texts closely to understand their messages, interpret their meanings, appreciate their techniques, or understand their historical or social context. There's a broad range of things you can analyze when it comes to doing a literary analysis in the humanities field. I lean towards looking for interpretation, or looking at the historical and social context. I think it's really fascinating. But as a reader and writer, you can go beyond that as well. As long as we're looking for a specific interpretation, aiming towards deepening an audience appreciation of that work, you can make that literary analysis. If you can remember literature classes from the past, so maybe in high school or if you've taken anything since then, in class, you probably read something and then would discuss, like, what do you think this means? How did they do this? What do you think about this character? How did you know this was the theme or that kind of thing? It's just a continuation of that class discussion, asking you to respond to the text in some way, shape, or form, but can just think deeper about it. Yes, most writers are writing to write, and they're just expressing themselves creatively. But what can be really fun in the humanities is thinking about, well, yes, they wrote this, but what does this tell us about that author or this time period? Or could there be a hidden message that maybe they didn't realize because they were so embroiled in that original idea that they didn't even realize what was going on? So critical thought, using the text to think about, okay, what does this really mean? Obviously, that makes it difficult for a lot of reasons. Most pieces are not obvious in their purpose or meaning. They just wrote to write. They didn't have a bigger meaning, or the author sometimes is purposely vague in what they're trying to say. There's a lot of room for interpretation. My perspective and your classmate's perspective and this literary critic's perspective, they're all going to be different because we have different perspectives in life. So while yes, we may go through the same kind of programs of study and we may really dig into it the same way, we still have slightly different perspectives, and the way we interpret literature can vary some, so that can make it difficult. And then also you have to watch out for something called an unreliable narrator. Can we trust the information the character is giving us? And you guys will be reading a short story that has a little bit of an unreliable narrator, so you'll kind of get to experience that firsthand. But those are all things you have to potentially get over as a complication. However, At the end of the day, the literary analysis, a critical essay about literature, is just asking you to demonstrate your understanding of the work that you read and your ability to think critically. If you can make a clear argument, pull in evidence from the text, even connect to what other scholars are saying, you're in the right spot. Humanities is very gray, where you very rarely are going to say this is right versus wrong. So if you can demonstrate those skills and it's logical, you're going the right way. You're doing great. You can choose to focus on formal, stylistic, or symbolic features. You have a wide range open to you to choose from. So how can I find meaning in this work? Well, you can find the conflict. Look how the text treats that conflict. So what's the main issue in the short story, the poem, the novel, the play, the essay, whatever. What's that main issue? And then how's it treated? How's it discussed? One textbook, they say I Say, which you may have used in English 111, gives 4 questions that you can ask to help with this. You can say, what is the central conflict? What side, if any, does the text seem to favor? What's your evidence, and how might others interpret your evidence? Because don't forget, we need to think about what would the opposition say to make sure that we can say, like, no, my interpretation is correct. And then what's your opinion of the text? What do you think about it? Why do you think that? Sometimes your initial response will clue you into things more than you realize it if you'll let yourself sit and kind of like meditate and marinate in those ideas. In the humanities, when we're writing, there's a couple of key features we have to have, especially when we're doing literary analysis, but these apply to the humanities in general as well. If you're doing a more formal writing, you need to have an arguable thesis. So it needs to be something that can be argued and is worth arguing. One example is Oedipus Rex is a tragic hero. That's not really arguable. That's just a fact when it comes to the Oedipus cycle. We know that. So we wouldn't really want to use that as our base for a true literary analysis. It's a good one to start with the first time you do it, maybe, but it's not truly arguable. So make sure what you're saying is an argument. You have to pay attention to the text language, the themes or patterns happening, because if you're not basing it off what the text is actually saying and doing, then your interpretation is going to be way out there and it's not going to be logically founded. Offer a clear interpretation. You do not need to say, well, it might mean this, and I think it means that. Nope. This is what it means. Be confident in your stance and be very clear, because we need to agree with your interpretation, and if you're not clear, we can't agree. We do use MLA style most of the time in the humanities. Very rarely you'll see someone use maybe the APA because they're publishing in an APA journal, but most of the time it's MLA. And we also use active voice and present tense. Active voice means we are actively doing something, so the text did this, not it will do that. If you can say by zombies after the verb, it's not active tense. So the cake was eaten by zombies. That's a passive voice. We don't want that. We would want to say so-and-so ate the cake. They actively did that action. And we also keep things in the present tense most of the time. So we're saying this is actively happening right now instead of it was a thing. We want to say it's still an interpretation, still an argument that we're engaging in now. Some things to keep in mind in terms of what you can consider when writing is that this is full of qualitative data, meaning we're going to have anecdotes. You might have secondary research of what other scholars are saying or information about the literary movements, the time periods. You're going to look at both primary and secondary sources. So primary would be the original works, a first-hand account or journal. Secondary sources would be articles, opinions or reviews, annotations. So primary is the original, secondary is the commentary on that original, is a way that you can think about it. We do not use first-person point of view. We do not say, I think this, or my opinion is that. We know that. This is a subjective field because humans are subjective. We can't be unbiased. So don't remind us of the subjectivity, but just be confident in yourself and say, like, nope, this is how it is. This is the interpretation. It's generally seen that you're kind of weakening your argument when you use that first person. Since we know that this is subjective and we're not supposed to take it as absolute fact, just do your best to make sure the data that you pull in, the evidence you pull in, really does make sense and that you fully connect it back to your argument, because otherwise we may misinterpret it. So yes, you're going to be a little bit of subjective in your opinion, and that's okay. Just make sure that your evidence is logically connected and explained to anybody who might be reading. There is no set organization, unlike the IMRAD that we briefly discussed, or even what we saw with the social sciences. But you do have a general flow where you're going to have an introduction, a body, and conclusion. So in your introduction, you might give a brief context of the work or the period. You might explain why we're examining the piece, and then end with a thesis of your interpretation. So that thesis is your claim. It's your argument about that text. Your body paragraphs are where you're going to be providing evidence to support your thesis. You should address why your interpretation is the best, why yours is the most convincing, why people should believe you. Those body paragraphs are going to vary depending on how much you have to say, the length requirement, and the length of the text. You might have 3, you might have 20. It just depends. And then in your conclusion, you're going to review your thesis and the important evidence, but make sure you address the implications. Why does this matter? What are we going to do with this? How far should we go, and what should we think about? So introduce your piece, bring it in real narrow with your thesis. We've got like your body paragraphs, keeping us real focused, connecting back to your thesis with each piece of evidence, and then you'll open it back up in your conclusion with a wider implication than just, great, this is an argument, now what? But that's how we approach the humanities, and that's the flow we're going to use for our last project in this class.